Greetings, fellow sojourners. Today's devotion is Psalm 131, a rather short psalm, in continuation of the songs of ascent. O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me. But I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like the weaned child that is with me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time on and forevermore. So this is a rather interesting psalm, one that is attributed to King David, but it seems to be coming from the perspective of a woman. If you look at the last part of verse 2, that my soul is like the weaned child that is with me. So that's kind of interesting. At least I find it sort of interesting. So this psalm, as it kind of speaks to me initially, it was something that the way I was kind of reading it was that it was somebody who was feeling low, feeling down, not feeling super cheerful or happy, which is a normal state for some of us, at least on occasion. But this one, as I read it more and thought about it more and prayed about it more, it really speaks to me about humility and dependence on God. The psalmist writing that their heart is not lifted up and their eyes are not raised too high, which is raising one's eyes high or lowering one's eyes speaks more of humility. Looking upwards, raising one's eyes is speaking of a bit of arrogance. So this one is to me about humility and not occupying your things with too great or too marvelous, and thinking in terms of not occupying their mind with things that are beyond their understanding, not that they're incapable, not that they're simple or lacking intelligence, but things that are far beyond their understanding, and not dwelling on those things, but having a state of mind of faith, of trusting and believing in things that are beyond understanding, and of course, dependence on God is that thing that should and can create in us a great deal in sense of humility when we consider how great and marvelous God is. It is not so much an occupation of ours to try to figure God out, but to submit in obedience to God in a great way, or in a great sense, with a great sense of humility, and recognizing the greatness of God, and in comparison to that, how small, if you will, that we are, and then realizing that a God that is so far beyond our understanding and thoughts to love us like he does is and should create in us a sense of humility and gratefulness. Excuse me. As far as what verse 2 is speaking about, being like quieting your soul like a weaned child with its mother, the child has been weaned, is no longer dependent on the mother for nourishment, but certainly dependent on the mother for just about everything else, well, including nourishment, just not directly coming from the mother's body. And we too are dependent on God for everything, because he is the source of everything in our life and in our world. And as far as who we are, he is also the author of all of that as well. And so dependence, but not the dependence maybe perhaps we would have as a very young child or infant. There is some level of independence, but not a great deal, because to depend on ourselves is going to leave us wanting, is going to leave us failing, and is going to leave us with a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of, in a sense, of emptiness, and perhaps that disquiet in our hearts when we are dependent on ourselves. So it's fully relying on God for the things that we need in this world and in our lives. And that also is coming from a place of humility. If we don't think we need God, if we don't think God can provide the things that we need, and we're perfectly capable of doing it ourselves, then we then become the idol in our own lives. We become a God of our own lives. And that certainly is not ideal. So having that sense of having faith, and having a deep faith and an active faith, does require a great deal of humility and dependence on God, recognizing just how amazing he is. And so I know that's not an easy thing for us, dependence is something we fight and struggle against because we are fiercely independent creatures. But it is not dependent in a sense of weakness, but only in weakness compared to who God is. Not our own individual weakness or weakness compared to other human beings, but compared to the power and the might and the marvelous nature of God. It is certainly, dependence is a benefit to us. And that God is willing to supply us and provide us with those things is an amazing and incredible blessing. All of the things that we have from God that I've talked about for 130 Psalms are all kind of packed into that idea. So, and finally, the hope that we have is in God. Again, that hope comes from also that sense of dependence. If we are independent of God and if we don't trust in God, then there is no reason for us to have hope in Him. So humility and dependence are a key factor in us having hope in God and knowing who God is and trusting in God. As the psalmist wrote, from this time on and forevermore. So that's our devotion for today. Tomorrow, Psalm 132, which I believe, if I turn the page, is the final. No, it is not. We still have a couple more songs of ascent. They continue on, but it is a bit longer. So until then, know that you are loved.